Jake?
COVID safe. I just have a couple of additional updates for you. Some of which was provided by the Department of Defense this morning, but I wanted to make sure you all had this information as well. As you may have seen, the airport, and as Jake noted, is currently open for military flight operations as well as limited commercial flight operations. And throughout the night, 9 C-17s arrived delivering equipment and approximately 1,000 troops. Additionally, 7 C-17s have departed. These flights lifted approximately 700 to 800 passengers, and we can confirm 165 of these passengers are American citizens. The rest are a mix of SIV applicants and third country nationals. And I would also note that, in addition, the intention is to have additional flights out this morning. There's obviously going to be operational updates that will be provided on a regular basis by the Department of Defense. But as you saw them brief out, our focus over the last 24 to 48 hours has been securing the airport and ensuring that we can begin to expedite flights of both American citizens, SIV applicants, and others out. I also just wanted to note that this morning, on a different topic, Biden administration officials joined a meeting of the U.S. Conference of Mayors to discuss our eviction prevention efforts. CDC Director Rochelle Walensky provided an update on the state of the pandemic, and Associate Attorney General Vinita Gupta reiterated ways that mayors across the country can work closely with state and local courts to set up eviction diversion programs in their city. This meeting is just the latest in our efforts to communicate and work with local officials to ensure we're getting assistance out to keep people in their homes. I know we've been here a while, but I know there are lots of topics out there. Go ahead, Josh.
Thanks, Jen. With regard to the booster shots, how many shots does the U.S. have available for boosters? And will supplying boosters have any impact on U.S. vaccine donations around the world?
So let me first note that tomorrow the COVID-19 team and our health and medical experts will host a briefing and we'll discuss next steps as it relates to boosters. I would also note for your planning that you can expect to hear from the President on this topic as well following their briefing. So I will leave it to them to provide additional details and to answer what I know are your good questions about data and an understanding of what leads to decisions along those lines. On the supply component of that, I'm sure they will address that, Josh, but one of the things we have said repeatedly, and I will note, I said back in May, Jeff Zients said again in July, is that part of our operational focus was ensuring we had enough supply to provide booster shots should that be a decision made by the FDA. So that has been in our planning processes for months now, and certainly we've planned for this contingency, and we'll wait for a formal announcement.
Does the President plan and the First Lady plan to get booster shots?
Certainly, if they are recommended, once a formal announcement or briefing is done, they will certainly plan to follow the guidelines, of course.
What's the rest of his week look like? Like he's up at Camp David now. Is he still going to Wilmington? What's the schedule?
Well, I think Rachel asked this earlier, so the President will return to the White House. I don't have an exact time for you, but tomorrow he will both be doing an interview with George Stephanopoulos for ABC, and he will also, where he will, of course, I'm certain, be speaking to the situation on the ground in Afghanistan. He'll also be delivering some remarks on COVID as well. In terms of additional portions of the schedule next week, we're still working those through, so I don't have an update for you at this moment in time. Go ahead.
Thank you. On COVID, is the White House concerned that moving forward with boosters could make it that much harder to get more unvaccinated Americans to get that initial shot?
Well, one of the pieces that I expect our COVID team to speak to tomorrow is our operational plans as it relates to ensuring we are making sure everybody is vaccinated and following FDA and CDC guidelines. I think what you can expect to hear from them is that we are going to follow some of the best practices we have used to date, which is providing access, providing information, and right now we're in a place where we are focused on providing access, of course, to vaccines around the country and communities around the country through a range of mechanisms. So we're actually at an easier operational point in this regard than we were several months ago. But yes, we understand it's going to take a significant operational focus, educational focus, and PR focus to get the information out once it's finalized.
Thank you. And one more on Afghanistan. Has the President or any administration official been in contact with former Afghanistan President Ghani?
Not that I'm aware of. Go ahead.
You mentioned at the top that about 700 people have been evacuated in the past 24 hours. Pentagon officials, including Press Secretary John Kirby, expect that number to increase to
Yeah.
5,000 to 9,000 a day. Can you talk about what needs to happen between now and then to ramp the number up, and when you expect to hit it?
Sure, Weijia, it's a good question. I think what I had been referring to just a few minutes ago was the fact that our focus has been on securing not just the perimeter of the airport, but also operational capacity at the airport, which of course is a Department of Defense operation they're overseeing in coordination with the State Department. And so because we've had success in that regard, we are hopeful and expect to expedite additional flights out. So that was not the place where we were at this time yesterday, and given we've made progress in this regard, we are hopeful to increase the number of people, American citizens, SIV applicants, and others that we can get out of the country.
And then it's our understanding that Americans have been called to the airport, but it's up to them to travel there at their own risk. Why isn't the U.S. providing any support, any transportation for them to get to Kabul?
Well, I would just go back to what our National Security Advisor discussed as it relates to the Taliban and discussions with them about safe passage for people who are coming to the airport. We've also seen, I don't have an exact number for you, I'm sure the Department of Defense and State Department can provide that, but a large number of American citizens and others making their way successfully to the airport over the course of the last 24 hours.
Just one more. I know we all tried to ask Jake this question, but can you offer any guarantee to the Americans and Afghan allies that if they remain there past the end of the month, U.S. troops will help them evacuate past the end of the month?
Weijia, our focus right now is on doing the work at hand and on the task at hand, and that is day by day getting as many American citizens, as many SIV applicants, as many members of a vulnerable population who are eligible to be evacuated to the airport and out on planes. And we're going to do that in an expeditious fashion. That is the focus of the President, of our Secretary of Defense, of our Secretary of State, and everybody on our national security team. So that is where we will keep our efforts. Go ahead.
Thank you. There's been some criticism from Democratic lawmakers on Capitol Hill, Mark Warner, Bob Menendez saying, I'm disappointed that the Biden administration clearly did not accurately assess the implications of a rapid withdrawal. What is the White House's response to those lawmakers?
Well, I would first say that we did assess early on, when the President asked for a clear-eyed assessment, that there would be impacts and there would be consequences of making the choice he made. He also acknowledged yesterday, and I would just reiterate, that this did happen more rapidly than we anticipated here, than anyone anticipated. I think that accounts for members of Congress and people who are on the ground in Afghanistan. And what our effort is now is focused on moving as many people out as we can from the country. But I would also note and reiterate to anyone who's a critic that any president has to make difficult choices as commander-in-chief, as Jake Sullivan just said. And the president made the choice that he was not going to ask U.S. men and women, servicemen and women, to fight a war that the Afghans were not willing to fight for themselves. It does not mean there aren't going to be impacts that are gut-wrenching, that are heart-wrenching, that we're all watching transpire over the last couple of days. But these are the difficult choices you have to make as commander-in-chief, and that's the choice he made.
And does he still have confidence in his intelligence teams?
He certainly does. He works in lockstep, and he's been briefed on a regular basis, as Jake just outlined, multiple times a day sometimes, by members of his national security team, and we're working in close coordination to get the job done each day. Go ahead.
Sort of follow up on Caitlin's questions about criticism from people who are your allies or your friends. David Axelrod has called you the best press secretary in his lifetime, I think.
My mom would like that.
Okay. But he's also said that the events of the last weekend are, this is paraphrasing here, but indefensible, I think. He said you can't defend them. And he has basically said that you guys should acknowledge that it was a failure and be willing to say that the events of the last several days were a failure, even as you maybe, defend the broader question of the drawdown in Afghanistan. What do you say to David Axelrod, who is such a fan of yours?
Mutual. There are a few people I respect as much as David Axelrod in the world of politics. He's brilliant. He's also a great human being. But he would be the first to say that there is a difference between being on the outside and speaking on television and being on the inside, and the difficult choices that you have to make. And as I've noted, and as Jake noted, even as we're watching over the last couple of days, heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching photos, you referred to some of them, Mike. The president stands by his decision because he knows it's in the interest of the United States, our national security, and the American people. And he is not going to ask mothers and fathers to send their children to fight a war the Afghans won't fight for themselves. And that does not mean that there aren't chaotic moments. There are. There does not mean there aren't moments that we may look back and take a look at approaches and how to address things moving forward. Of course, that's a part of how you assess governing and how you assess operations moving forward. But right now, and he would be the first, he spent, as you all know, an important role, a vital role, advising President Obama to acknowledge that when you're in government, you're faced with difficult choices. The president is faced with difficult choices, so are members of his team. And what you have to always make the decisions based on is what's in the interest of the American people. Go ahead.
Does the president believe that his orders were executed as intended? In these past couple of days, obviously those images that we've all seen, I mean, is he assessing blame at all for that? And does he feel like he ordered the military to do certain things and they did it as intended?
Well, his order was to deploy additional military men and women to go to Afghanistan to help evacuate American citizens, SIV applicants, and others safely out of the country, some to the United States, and to help our partners and allies around the world as well. We are effectively doing that. And the photos we're seeing of chaotic moments, no doubt, at the airport are of many Afghans who want to get out of the country. We certainly understand that as well. And as Jake just said, when you're at a point where things are happening more quickly than anyone would have anticipated, not just people in this White House, but certainly people in Afghanistan, people in the international community, probably people in Congress, then you're going to have some chaotic scenes. But the president is confident in his national security team and their ability to get the mission done and get the mission accomplished. And as I just noted earlier, right now the airport is secure. We're working to expedite flights and get more people out of the country.
And then just to follow on, the president has been quite clear that he does not have any trust in the Taliban. And so I guess Jake kind of went about this in a couple of different ways, but do you guys have any assurances that the Taliban is clearing the safe passage to the airports? And what are the consequences to them if they do not?
Well, the consequences are the full weight and force of the United States military, and I think we've made that clear. But right now, and we're not trusting, we're not taking their word for it. We are watching closely, we are in close contact, and we are certainly assessing whether they are going to abide by their commitments and by their actions. Go ahead.
How many Americans are in Afghanistan, both inside Kabul and outside Kabul, and should they get priority on evacuation flights? John Kirby said that it's going to be a mix of SIV applicants and Americans, but should those remaining American citizens get priority, and how many are there in the country right now?
Well, we are prioritizing a number of groups: American citizens, embassy employees and their families, our locally employed staff, SIV holders and applicants, Afghans who would be eligible for P1, P2 refugee programs, which includes, by the way, translators who may have assisted media organizations and others. There have been, how the process works, I should tell you, is that there are individuals who will self-identify as American citizens. That number is around 11,000. Beyond that, around the country. Beyond that, though, there are individuals who may not have self-identified, who may come and request assistance and come to the airport. We're going to work to assist, of course, American citizens, but we also have a responsibility and obligation to help the men and women who served by our sides, many of the sides of your colleagues as translators and as interpreters, and our locally employed staff and others.
So just to confirm, 11,000 in the entire country, not just in Kabul?
Well, I would just say that's the self-identified number, right? So, but we will continue to provide assistance, and we are prioritizing American citizens. We are also working to get additional officials out who have played an important role.
Just to follow up on this, obviously getting them through and getting them to the airport is the challenge, as everyone else here has noted. But the administration is left to negotiate with the Taliban, including one of the commandos who was released from Guantanamo Bay as part of the Bo Bergdahl prisoner swap when President Biden was vice president. How does he feel about that? Does he have any regrets, and how's he digesting that?
Well, first I would note that, one, I'd point you to the Department of the Intelligence community to assess the identity of the individual. I know there's been reporting on it, but that's not my position to do from here. I would also note that in prior negotiations and commitments made during the Trump administration, there were thousands of individuals who were released. So our focus right now is on, again, not taking the Taliban's word for it. We are assessing, we are closely watching, and we are being very clear about the capacities and the capabilities we have at hand should they be needed. Of course, that's not our objective.
And then the last question, what are we doing to counter-message with what's happening right now with China in Taiwan? The president said yesterday that China and Russia would love nothing more than to have the U.S. sink billions of dollars and stay here forever, but it seems to be that they're celebrating this. They were touting U.S. humiliation in Afghanistan and a warning to Taiwan and other allies that the U.S. won't come for help if war breaks out. China's embassy is functioning as normal. So what are we doing to counter their propaganda, and how does the administration view Russia and China's engagement with the Taliban?
Well, first, we of course are in touch with the Chinese and the Russians as we work to bring men and women out of Afghanistan, and including our SIV applicants and others. Our message is very clear. We stand by, as is outlined in the Taiwan Relations Agreement, by individuals in Taiwan. We stand by partners around the world who are subject to this kind of propaganda that Russia and China are projecting, and we're going to continue to deliver on those words with actions. Our objective in Afghanistan is to deliver also on what the president promised, which is to not put the men and women who have served our country bravely over the past 20 years in harm's way again. And that's what we'll also be projecting to them as well.
Jen, why was August better than, say, November or December to be getting out?
In terms of the August 31st timeline?
Correct, because this is the Taliban fighting season, and that would not be.
I know there's been a fair amount of focus on that, but I wouldn't say that that has been an assessment of a difference here in terms of what our timeline would have been from the beginning.
So there's no belief that it would have been any different in December than it is in August?
I don't believe that military officials have made that assessment.
As we ask about the risk assessment right now, what is the current risk assessment in terms of terrorism and the potential threat that exists within Afghanistan against the United States?
Well, I think as the president conveyed yesterday and also conveyed back in May, part of our objective here was to make sure we had the resources to fight the counterterrorism threat that has changed over the last 20 years, wherever it is. And that has not been emanating from Afghanistan in the way that it was 2 decades ago, which is understandable. We have a range of capacities, over-the-horizon capacities, as well as capacities where we do effective counterterrorism operations in countries where we have absolutely no presence in any way at all. We will continue to watch closely, continue to assess, but I'm not in a position, I'll leave that to our intelligence community to provide an update on. Go ahead.
You said just a little bit ago that, if the Taliban does not agree to these safe passage agreements or conversations, that the consequence will be the full force and weight of the U.S. military. What exactly does that mean? Does that mean there's a scenario where we go back in?
That means that we have been clear, and I think my colleagues at the Defense Department have also conveyed this, that we have our own capacity, military capacity from here. Obviously, we have worked with them to ensure safe passage. That's where our objective is. I'm not going to outline or detail it further.
And one more. You said, the administration said that the evacuation efforts were stalled in part because some Afghans did not want to leave earlier. They wanted to stay. Mm-hmm. Do you have any specifics on this population? Exactly how many Afghan allies are we talking about who were eligible to leave but chose to remain?
It's a good question. I can see if I can give you a greater assessment of that. What I can tell you is that of the initial numbers of SIV applicants that were granted visas, there was a good chunk of that number who did not take advantage of those visas and depart. Now, that does not change our commitment. That does not change our obligation. But it's just an important component of the story of the last 6 months. Go ahead.
11,000 you mentioned, just for clarity, those are 11,000 self-identified people in the country not who want to leave. Do you have any indication of how many Americans are still trying to get out of Afghanistan?
I can see if there's a greater assessment. I would point you to the State Department on that, though. They'd have the most up-to-date numbers.
Do you have a total number of people overall, including third country nationals and Afghan nationals, who you want to get out over the coming days?
Again, there are a number of prioritized programs. I think we've given out some numbers in terms of, if you look at SIV applicants, we have about 22,000 spots at military bases here, an additional 8,000 in third countries. Obviously, we're going to work to assess and make sure we get, and we work to get as many people out as possible who are eligible for those programs, as well as, of course, separately, American citizens. But I don't have a number or an update for you on the total.
Sorry, I know they're going to announce this tomorrow, but are we talking about booster shots for everyone? And if so, why should healthy young Americans be getting a third shot when so many in the world don't have a first shot yet?
Well, they will provide a briefing tomorrow on what the recommendations are, and I encourage you to ask a question, as I'm sure you will ask a question at their briefing, Josh, as you've been following this closely. I'm not going to get ahead of their announcement or the president addressing this tomorrow, but I will tell you that we believe that that is a false choice. We can do both, and the United States is far and away the biggest contributor to the global supply, the global fight against COVID. We will continue to be the arsenal for vaccines around the world. We also have enough supply, and we have long planned for enough supply should a booster be needed for the eligible population. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. The National Security Advisor said when a civil war comes to an end with an opposing force marching on the ground, there's going to be scenes of chaos. There's going to be lots of people leaving the country. But my question is, why didn't you have a better plan to secure the airport? How could you not anticipate crowds of people rushing the tarmac and overwhelming limited security if there was a contingency plan in place?
Well, first I'd note something that Jake Sullivan said and John Kirby said, which is, and I'll probably butcher their iteration of it, but basically the best laid plans require adjustment when you get on the ground and see what the situation on the ground is. We have secured the airport in a short period of time. There were initial scenes of chaos, but that has been a priority, and we have accomplished that task. Now our focus is on getting planes in and getting American citizens, SIV applicants, our locally employed staff, some of your colleagues out of the country. But we did effectively do that thanks to the hard work of the men and women on the ground from the State Department and the Defense Department over the last 24 to 48 hours. Okay. Oh, I called on you. Just let me do one more.
Thank you. Just two quick questions. I want to follow up. Jake said that the president had not spoken to any other world leaders yet. Why is that?
Jake also said that our focus right now has been on operational efforts, which includes coordination at a lower level than leaders and heads of state. And that is our focus on working with third countries to help get their citizens out, or, of course, working with others on the ground to get vulnerable populations out. That's where the focus is at hand right now. And if there is a benefit in the president picking up the phone and calling world leader, he will certainly do that, and I expect he'll do that in the coming days. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.